The biting English wind whipped around the transport, carrying with it the scent of damp earth and distant coal smoke. Inside, huddled figures, German women, prisoners of war, or civilian internees, shivered, their faces etched with the privations of a war-torn homeland. They had been told Britain was starving, its cities rubble, its people desperate. Nazi propaganda had painted a grim picture of a nation on its knees, a mirror image of their own suffering. But as the truck rumbled to a halt and the canvas flap was pulled back, a sight unfolded before them that would shatter every belief, every ingrained lie, and fundamentally alter their understanding of the world. It was a revelation so profound, so utterly unexpected, that it would force them to confront a truth more devastating than any bomb. The late autumn of 1944 bled into the harsh winter of early 1945, a period of relentless attrition for the Third Reich. Deep in the heart of southern England, a nondescript facility, formerly a boarding school, now served as a detention centre for German female prisoners. These women, a mix of captured auxiliary personnel, civilian internees deemed a security risk, and a handful of genuine combatants, arrived from a Germany teetering on the brink of collapse. Their cities, Berlin, Hamburg, Dresden, were reduced to skeletal remains by Allied bombing raids. Food rationing had long since tightened to a near-starvation level, with ersatz products and meagre portions being the norm. The psychological toll was immense, a constant gnawing hunger coupled with the omnipresent fear of air raids and the crushing weight of a war clearly lost, though never admitted by their leadership. Among them was Helga Schmidt, a 28-year-old former secretary from Berlin, her once vibrant spirit dulled by chronic malnutrition and the loss of her entire family in a single bombing raid. Beside her was Greta Müller, 35, a mother from Hamburg, whose gaunt face betrayed the struggle to keep her two young children alive before their capture. And then there was Ilse Richter, a mere 19 from Dresden, whose youthful idealism had been systematically eroded by the grim realities of war and the relentless indoctrination of the Hitler Youth. Their journey to England had been arduous, marked by cramped conditions and the constant gnawing fear of the unknown. Nazi propaganda had painted Britain as a land of suffering, its people starving, its infrastructure shattered, a nation barely clinging to existence. They expected a similar, if not worse, level of deprivation, perhaps even a vengeful cruelty from their captors. Upon arrival at the British facility, their initial expectations were partially met. The camp itself was Spartan, the food plain, but crucially it was consistent and sufficient to prevent starvation, a stark contrast to the sporadic and meagre rations they had grown accustomed to. The guards, mostly older British women, were firm but not overtly cruel, a surprise to many who had been fed tales of Allied barbarity. Their days were filled with mundane tasks, punctuated by interrogations that probed their loyalties and knowledge. Physically, they were exhausted, their bodies bearing the scars of deprivation, their minds weary from years of propaganda and the constant struggle for survival. Psychologically, they were a complex mix of defiance, resignation, and a deep-seated, almost pathological belief in the narratives they had been fed. They clung to the idea that Britain was suffering, that their own sacrifices were part of a grand, necessary struggle against a weakened enemy. The decision to expose these prisoners to British civilian life was not born of altruism, but of a calculated psychological strategy. British and American intelligence officers, observing the prisoners' unwavering adherence to Nazi ideology despite their dire circumstances, theorized that direct confrontation with reality might be the most potent denazification tool. The plan was audacious, a controlled visit to a local market under heavy guard to allow the women to witness firsthand the relative abundance of wartime Britain. The objective was to shatter the carefully constructed illusion of a suffering enemy, to sow seeds of doubt that might eventually blossom into a rejection of the regime that had so thoroughly deceived them. The prison environment itself with its drab walls and monotonous routine, had offered no such contrast. The air inside was stale, a mixture of disinfectant and unwashed bodies. The only sounds were the clatter of mess tins and the low murmur of German voices. But outside, beyond the barbed wire, a different world awaited. A world they were about to confront, a world that would challenge every preconceived notion they held about the war, their enemy, and ultimately, themselves. The stage was set for a profound and unsettling revelation. The day of the market visit dawned crisp and cold, a typical late autumn morning in southern England. The prisoners, selected for their varying levels of ideological adherence and potential for psychological impact, were loaded into a covered lorry, their faces a mixture of apprehension and curiosity. Helga, Greta, and Ilse were among them. They had been told only that they were being taken for an outing, a phrase that seemed incongruous with their status as enemy combatants. As the lorry rumbled through the quaint English countryside, past fields still green despite the season, a sense of unease began to settle over them. This was not the bombed-out wasteland they had been promised. Upon arrival at the market town, the women were disembarked under the watchful eyes of armed British guards, a mix of military police and local constabulary. The market square, bustling with activity, immediately assaulted their senses. The air, instead of the expected stench of decay and poverty, was filled with the earthy aroma of fresh produce, the sweet scent of baked goods, and the faint metallic tang of meat. Their eyes, accustomed to the muted greys and browns of wartime Germany, were overwhelmed by a riot of colors: vibrant red apples, deep green cabbages, golden orange carrots piled high on wooden stalls. The brutal reality of what they were witnessing began to sink in. Here, despite nearly 5 years of war, was an undeniable abundance. Fresh vegetables, though rationed, were plentiful and of high quality. Butcher stalls, while not overflowing, displayed cuts of meat, beef, lamb, pork that many of the women hadn't seen in years, certainly not in such quantities. Dairy products, milk, cheese and butter were available, albeit with ration coupons. And the bread. Oh, the bread. Loaves of crusty golden brown bread, made from pure wheat flour, without the sawdust or potato starch fillers that had become a staple in Germany. It was a sight that brought tears to Greta's eyes, a visceral reminder of the hunger her children had endured. The psychological shock was immediate and profound. Helga, usually stoic, found herself reaching out, almost involuntarily, to touch a plump tomato, its skin smooth and unblemished. The cognitive dissonance was overwhelming. Every piece of propaganda, every broadcast, every newspaper article that had depicted Britain as a starving, broken nation crumbled before her eyes. Ilse, the youngest, stared wide-eyed at a display of sweets, a luxury she hadn't even dreamed of since childhood. A wave of anger, hot and bitter, washed over her. Anger at the lies, at the deception, at the sacrifices demanded under false pretenses. Some women broke down, sobbing openly, their carefully constructed mental defenses collapsing under the weight of this undeniable truth. Others, particularly the older, more ideologically entrenched, reacted with denial, muttering about staged displays or enemy trickery, desperately trying to reconcile what they saw with what they had been told. The British and American intelligence officers, observing from a discreet distance, noted every reaction. This was not just a market visit. It was a carefully orchestrated psychological operation designed to expose the chasm between Nazi rhetoric and Allied reality. From an American perspective, this pragmatic approach, rooted in the belief that truth ultimately prevails, was a testament to the strength of democratic systems. While Germany had poured resources into elaborate propaganda, the Allies were demonstrating the simple, undeniable power of a functioning society, even under wartime conditions. The human cost of this confrontation was immense. The realization of how deeply they had been deceived, how their faith had been exploited, how their loved ones had suffered unnecessarily, began to erode the very foundations of their belief system. The sacrifice of believing those lies, of enduring unimaginable hardship for a cause built on falsehoods, was a burden that would weigh heavily on their souls. Yet, amidst the shock and anger, a flicker of resilience emerged. The human capacity to confront uncomfortable reality, however painful, was being tested, and for some, the first tentative steps towards a new understanding were being taken. The power of truth, stark and unyielding, had begun its work. The market visit, far from being a mere spectacle, marked a critical turning point, a deliberate operational validation of a novel denazification strategy. British and American intelligence officers, led by a pragmatic American psychologist, Captain John Miller, meticulously documented every flicker of emotion, every whispered comment, every physical reaction from the German women. Their observations were not just anecdotal. They were part of a systematic study designed to understand the psychological impact of confronting observable reality against deeply ingrained propaganda. The conflict of doctrines was stark. The rigid, fantastical narratives of Nazi ideology versus the undeniable, tangible evidence of a functioning, albeit wartime, British society. Inside the detention facility in the days following the market visit, the atmosphere was palpably different. The initial shock had given way to a simmering undercurrent of doubt and resentment. Some of the older, more fanatical officers among the prisoners, like Frau Obersturmführer Schmidt, a former SS auxiliary, vehemently refused to believe what they had seen, dismissing it as an elaborate Allied deception, a Hollywood set designed to break their morale. They clung to their ideology with a desperate tenacity, their faces hardening with renewed defiance. However, the younger women, particularly those like Ilse Richter, who had grown up entirely under the Nazi regime, found it increasingly difficult to reconcile the images of abundance with the constant narrative of Allied suffering. Ilse, who had always believed implicitly in the Führer's words, now felt a profound sense of betrayal. Her youthful idealism, once channeled into unwavering loyalty, began to fracture, replaced by a gnawing suspicion. Greta, the mother, was consumed by a quiet, burning anger. The sight of fresh bread and milk had solidified a horrifying realization. Her children had suffered needlessly, their hunger a direct consequence of the lies propagated by the regime she had once trusted. This internal struggle was precisely what the intelligence officers had hoped for. Captain Miller, a proponent of truth as a weapon, believed that direct, undeniable evidence was far more effective than traditional interrogation methods in breaking down ideological barriers. The first direct engagement where the operation demonstrated its effectiveness came during a series of informal discussions disguised as cultural exchange sessions. During one such session, a British officer casually mentioned the availability of certain foodstuffs in London. A prisoner, a former schoolteacher, scoffed, citing a recent German radio broadcast claiming widespread famine in the capital. Another prisoner, who had been on the market visit, hesitantly interjected, describing the well-stocked stalls she had personally witnessed. The ensuing debate, initially tense, quickly devolved into a heated argument among the prisoners themselves, with the market visitors passionately defending their first-hand accounts against the ideologues. This was the breakthrough. Slowly, tentatively, some prisoners began to cooperate. They started providing intelligence, not necessarily military secrets, but insights into the morale of the German populace, the effectiveness of Allied bombing, and the growing disillusionment within the Reich. More significantly, they began to openly question and reject Nazi ideology, not out of fear, but out of a profound sense of disillusionment and betrayal. The enemy, Nazi intelligence, still operating through clandestine channels and propaganda broadcasts, tried to explain away these defections, labeling the women as weak, traitors, or victims of Allied brainwashing. But the truth, once seen, was difficult to unsee. The contrast between rigid ideology, which demanded blind faith, and flexible reality, which presented undeniable facts, was too stark. American optimism and pragmatism, which had driven the innovation of this psychological warfare tactic, allowed for rapid adaptation and refinement of the approach. The operation was validating the core American belief that an informed populace, exposed to truth, would ultimately choose freedom and reality over deception and tyranny. The prisoners, standing on the precipice of a new understanding, realized they faced a truth their system couldn't prepare them for, a truth that demanded they reevaluate everything they had ever believed. The innovative psychological operation, initiated in the waning months of World War II, culminated not just in the denazification of individual prisoners, but in a profound, lasting legacy that reshaped post-war strategies. As the war concluded in May 1945, the true impact of exposing German female prisoners to the relative abundance of British civilian markets became evident. A significant percentage of the women, particularly those who had been younger and less ideologically entrenched, had undergone a remarkable transformation. Their initial shock and anger had matured into a deep-seated rejection of Nazi ideology, replaced by a nascent understanding of democratic values and the power of truth. This was not merely a superficial change, it was a fundamental shift in worldview. When given the choice, many of these denazified prisoners opted not to return to a Germany shattered by war and increasingly divided by the emerging Cold War, particularly those whose homes were now in the Soviet-occupied zones. Instead, a notable number chose to remain in Britain, seeking new lives, or emigrated to other Western countries, including the United States. Their experiences, often shared with intelligence officers and later with post-war reconstruction agencies, provided invaluable insights into the psychological mechanisms of totalitarian control and the most effective methods for countering it. This contribution, though often overlooked in grand historical narratives, was vital to the success of post-war denazification programs, proving that exposure to reality and the demonstration of a superior, functioning system worked far more effectively than punitive measures alone. The climate of victory for those involved in this psychological warfare was not just about military triumph, but about the triumph of innovation and human ingenuity in the face of ideological rigidity. The forgotten heroes of this operation were the intelligence officers, psychologists, and even the ordinary British citizens, who, by simply living their lives, became unwitting participants in a powerful demonstration of systemic superiority. Their work proved that wars could be won not solely through military might, but through the strategic deployment of truth and the undeniable evidence of a society that, even under duress, prioritized the well-being of its citizens. The lasting consequences of this operation were far-reaching. It informed the design of subsequent denazification efforts, emphasizing re-education and exposure to democratic principles over harsh retribution. It highlighted the importance of demonstrating, rather than merely proclaiming, the benefits of a free society. The fates of the protagonists reflected this complex legacy. Helga Schmidt, after a period of intense reflection and re-education, chose to remain in Britain, eventually becoming a vocal advocate for international understanding and democratic principles. Her personal story, a powerful testament to the corrosive nature of propaganda. Greta Müller, driven by the desire to build a better future for her children, returned to a devastated Hamburg, becoming an active participant in the city's reconstruction, her new understanding of truth guiding her efforts. Ilse Richter, the youngest, struggled for years with the shame and guilt of her youthful indoctrination, but eventually found peace in a new life in Canada, dedicating herself to education, ensuring future generations would not fall prey to similar deceptions. This operation, seemingly small in the grand scheme of a global conflict, proved something fundamental about the human capacity to confront lies and emerge not just having survived, but having prospered through a newfound understanding of truth. It underscored how ordinary individuals, by simply opening their eyes to reality, could achieve extraordinary things, fundamentally altering their own destinies and contributing to a more just world. It was a testament to the enduring power of truth, a lesson etched into the fabric of history. If this compelling account of truth triumphing over deception resonated with you, imagine the other untold stories waiting to be discovered. Hit that subscribe button to join our community and never miss another deep dive into the pivotal moments that shaped our world. Your thoughts and insights are invaluable. Share your comments below, and let's continue the conversation about the enduring power of reality.